There's so much to talk about, I'm not even really sure where to start. Except right here.
Hey. You. Hi there. It's 4:19.
It's not.
Do you have a minute? Good. Then let's pack a bowl. 'Cause it's time for Cannabis Talk, a special 420 themed segment of the almost daily ZenCast, hosted by spiritual cannabis mystic, the incorrigible Mr. Zappa.
An hour late, but here we are.
Let's get lit, folks.
I mean, not only and thankfully not coughing, but I feel for you, man. Get it out. Welcome to the show, one and all. Thank you for stopping by and checking out the Almost Daily ZenCast and this special segment, Cannabis Talk, which is it's a crossover special weirdo mix and match episode with a little bit of Good Morning Trumptopia.
Yeah.
We've all been there. I mean, those of us who partake in the magical, mystical, spiritual plant ally, commonly referred to as weed. Quick disclaimers before we jump into this episode, which I think are wise to be shared often, if not on every episode, especially specifically these ones, the cannabis-oriented themed ones. Cannabis is recreationally and medicinally legal here in the state where I live. Please always be aware of your own state and local jurisdictions, policies, and rules and regulations about cannabis, where you can and cannot buy it, where you can and cannot smoke it, etc. I'm no bootlicker, but I also know it's ridiculously unwise to, encourage something get decriminalized and regulated and then break all the rules about it, because you'll get it taken away from you, especially in the current antagonistic atmosphere that we live in. At any rate, be wise, be safe, be smart, know the rules, know when to start, know when to stop, know when you're too young to get it and use it. Just like alcohol, it's not exactly wise, for many reasons, for people too young of age to engage with it directly. But that doesn't mean we need to vilify and criminalize it and stigmatize it. We just need to make people aware. Look what happened to alcohol. We could do a whole multi-part special episode about the history of alcohol as a consumer product and as an addiction and as all the other ways people perceive it, and get into some really sticky, complex issues where people have lots of differing opinions. But that's not what this show is about today. Welcome to the show. I am your humble and, yes, currently under the influence of cannabis, aka stoned, host, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. Good morning, Trumptopia. Oh, and for all my international listeners, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, and good night. Whatever time zone you're tuning into the show, whatever time frame you've got time to consume this content, I humbly thank you. And I welcome you with hospitality to the shared mental imaginarium space of both our minds that we sort of time-delayed co-create together when we enjoy this experience called podcasting. For those of you who may be new to this show, I'm a weird eccentric, and a dictionary may be required for those of you who've not used that word recently or come across that word recently. It's not a bad thing. Don't fear me. I'm not an evil person. And as you may or may not have noticed yet, I am on a crusade to call out the unnecessary and unwarranted hypervilification of other people. So please don't bring that to me. Where to start? This show, for anyone who's tuning in for the very first time, is an experimental, and there is an asterisk there that should be looked at, but I don't have the thing opened up to the actual right page. Hold on a second. I'm reading from my own blurbs. An experimental freeform talk radio style, and that is in quotes, audio blog, which is not in quotes, podcast entertainments, plural, show, listened to in over 20 plus countries. If you are curious about what this show has to do with anything else going on in my artistic life, please head on over to solo.to/Mr. Zeppo, where you can join me, myself, and I, the creators of this fictional character known as the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo, in exploring the radical intersection of technology, pop culture, politics, society, and unorthodox spirituality. Oh, I always want to use the word there, but I use it in the next phrasing, so it's redundant. So the radical intersection of technology, pop culture, politics, society, and spirituality in an unorthodox fashion with digital robot dance music. I should update that. Audience comments and feedback are encouraged. Warning, this show is known for being real, raw, and radically unscripted. Should update that part of the blurb too. Mature themes and language are used moderately, but never with hate or anger or animosity towards anyone. Should update that. That needs to be added in there. Disclaimer. Just taking a moment to read this occasionally because it should be brought in to the consciousness of all those who might want to venture into the depths of this podcast. Disclaimer. The original opinions, personal anecdotes, creative ideas, social satire, theoretical theories, and all other original intellectual property expressed on this show and its various subsegments are, except for when otherwise indicated, as in I'm quoting someone or referencing an ideology expressed by someone else, these otherwise most of the things here are entirely those of the online creative performance artist known as the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo, a.k.a. me, myself, and I. All right, thank you. Welcome to the show. What's going on in the world, especially vis-a-vis the perspective of those of us trapped here in the tug of war between Trumptopia and multi-ethnic, democracy-oriented United States of America. That's how I describe the current cultural storm or cultural conditions, socio-political cultural conditions of the ideological bantering and saber-rattling and public discourse going on in these great 50 states of ours. And I should be clear about something. Let me pause for a minute and to make clear for new listeners, old listeners, people who have explored the Zeppoverse a bit, people who have not explored the Zeppoverse a bit. Fundamentally, at the center of both my personal perspective and my artistic worldview is a sense of being... Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to create strange random object strike noises. And for those of you jumping to conclusions, no, I am not drinking anything besides mushroom coffee right now. I just had leftover objects that I like to fidget. Before there was fidget widgets, there was bottle caps, 2 bottle caps that you fidget with. It's fun. It works, and it's, free. Soda caps, anything with that ridge edge. But that's just a character detail, and I don't know why it came up, except for the object strike, which is totally unplanned. And I'm hyper, consciously, critically aware of object strike. When I set my cup down really hard right next to my device that I'm recording this on, because I don't have a fancy setup. I'm trying to bootstrap myself into building I built this in my home media empire. Okay, I digress. I was going to talk about how fundamental to my worldview, both in my narrative fiction work over on Wattpad and in my socio-political public discourse commentary project here in the Almost Daily ZenCast, and sort of sprinkled throughout, is that of a phenomena who I almost always forget the name of, but a feeling which has a name, has a title, of being sort of no longer intimately connected to your home place, the place you're from, and to contextualize it here in the language used in your local planetary lingo, to immigrate from one nation to another, and to not quite totally feel at home in the new place that is home. There's a name for that, and I've always felt that. I am a stranger in a strange land that feels like a stranger in a strange land in the place of my origin, right? But that's backed up with, I don't feel fully alienated. I want to explain that. I want to express that. Because arising from that sort of dislocation has come a sense of being a citizen of the world. Whether some might critique and judge, looking snobbily down their noses for being much more worldly than me, it's unwarranted because I've not done as much world traveling as it might require to feel that way. But I've done a bit, my own fair share for various reasons. I can't really be accused of being an active jet setter clan member, but for reasons that have ranged from semi-professional theater to family visits, I've had the opportunity to at least not have always been stuck in one place my entire life. And I'm not judging that as a critical thing, right? There's just a difference, and I'm not saying one is better than the other, or that there's a bad inherent in the one thing. But I do endorse travel if you can afford it, and if you can wing it, if you can just go visit a town across the state and not get into trouble and not cause trouble. It expands your mind when you do it in the right mindset. But more on that perhaps soon, perhaps not quite soon, depending on how well my memory works. Welcome to this show. Today's a wild and wacky day. It is Monday, May 16th, and it's 5:19 p.m. I missed 420 officially, but for some people who are lucky enough, and I don't always consider myself in this category, but sometimes my context and situation qualifies. Any hour can be 420 hour if you so responsibly can and are capable of choosing it to be. And I've known people who live that way, and they're awesome people that are fully capable of being responsible adults. Cannabis is hyper-vilified, has been for the vast majority of most people's lifetimes, because it goes back further than just these collection of generations that are around to engage in public discourse with each other about such issues. And we can get into a whole long histrionic and nostalgic walk down the things that led to weed being illegal in the United States of America after enjoying a brief golden era of being perfectly legal and perfectly common and perfectly accepted, and actually sort of put in things like sodas or cough syrups to help things that it helps, because it is indeed by both Aboriginal standards and more advanced, quote, scientific standards, which I say a little mockingly, it is a medicinal plant, in my humble opinion, after doing, genuinely, I believe, not just agreeing to someone telling me so, doing the research, right? It qualifies. And it and its sister plants have deep, powerful, meaningful potential uses that would radically and generally speaking in great ways, not just good ways, not just healthy ways, great ways, transform our standard everyday living experience through changing certain practices and industries and sort of impacting economy overall in ways that no one can doom and gloom into saying it would be, the end of the world or anything. It would be brilliant if society woke up to the benefits of cannabis and hemp and utilized them, implemented them in meaningful, well thought out, safe, secure ways. And of course avoided all the obvious pitfalls. And of course avoided all the ridiculous, hyper-vilified, irrational, fear-mongering claims by proving them wrong. The kind of claims typically made by those claiming to be open-minded thinkers over on the conservative end of the spectrum, but are really just sort of spewing out regurgitated, hardly processed talking points spoon-fed to them by that end of the ideological political echo chamber machine. Now, do I pretend to know everything about anything? Never, dear friends. Both as a fictional character and as a real-life creative artist who's trying to, hustle the work-from-home hustle in a meaningful, honest, high-integrity kind of way, bringing you interesting, engaging, if a little bit off-kilter and eccentric content for you to consume in ways that, if in theory, if enough people got on board, would generate meaningful income in such a way that I could build a career towards becoming a mogul and not a mogul. That's a almost pretentious sounding word, but a job creator. And I bring that up every so often, hopefully not too redundantly, because it is earnestly at the center of my vision, as is any of the other deep, meaningful statements that I rely on in terms of presenting to you my worldview and my argument, or my concerns and questions and theories and general talk radio chat content in regards to what's going on in the world and what's going on, particularly most of the time, specifically in the country that I find myself, bound to. Both, and let me be really, really clear, lest anyone jump to conclusions or assume the wrong thing and presume that that any false accusation might be true. I love this place. I'm a citizen of the world, but I love all 50 states of America. I haven't been to all 50 states, but I'm a loving person. I'm unconditional love for the human species. And people go crazy about that in a bunch of different directions. They're like, that's impossible. I'm like, listen, you can unconditionally love anyone and also maintain healthy respect boundaries, right? Hello. Okay. So why the crossover episode? Mostly just because about an hour and a half ago, or slightly more, I thought to myself, oh, it's just the right timing. If I get settled in, I can do a Cannabis Talk 420 episode and play the music, and it'll be right at 420 or right before 420. And I was almost on track to doing that, but I also totally wasn't. And here we are. It's now an hour later. But in the process, in the journey, I also, checked in on the state of the world, scanned through, the spectrum of news outlets available to me, and sort of just did a quick dip into some of the online headlines. Not pretending to be deeply researching any one thing or another, but just getting the barometer reading on what's going on. And something occurred to me, and that prompted me to really sort of want to talk about Trumtopian-like topics, or Trumtopian affiliated topics. America always has been a complex and complicated place. Let's be real, right? And let's honor the real truth that those are two different words that mean two different things, even if they're common enough that we usually just lump them together. Complex is one thing and complicated is another. And they both have different emotional baggage too. And if there's one place in the world, if there is any place in the world, but actually there's plenty. In fact, never mind what I was about to say. The whole world. Name for me, I'm going to flip it on its head. Name for me one place, one nation state, one jurisdiction, one area, one people that don't live in a set of conditions that could arguably be stated honestly to be both complex and complicated. Even in a good day, right? Even on a day where there isn't crazy mishigas and malarkey flying around and fake accusations of things and real accusations of things and rumor mongering, etc., etc. As you may have already found out, or you may be about to find out, I recently did a really long, really rambling, ranty episode, and I really earnestly struggled to try to keep these episodes tighter than all that, and I'm already failing in this one too. But some might argue slightly impassioned, hopefully not totally incoherent. I know that I'm somewhat spirally, but then again, I am someone making the argument that, hey, well, if you really look at everything and think about everything and see past the normal scale of things, almost everything is a spiral or is brought about into existence because of spiraling forces. But that's a whole nother huge epic episode we can dive into. This last episode that I did was like redonk long. From the 15th of May with a running duration of 173 minutes and 31 seconds, which I'm not even really sure what that is in hours, and I don't have a calculator, and I'm not in math mind to go be doing that kind of math. But it's more than an hour and a half, that's for sure. I said quite a few things, and I wanted to state one statement and let it resonate here in this episode again, because it's worth repeating. It's worth contemplating, in my humble opinion, and I bring this to the public discourse, in a humble, like, hey, you guys, maybe we should take a look at this and think about it kind of way. And it's worth encouraging others. Like, it's worth paying it forward and asking others to really think about this. Any ideology, any religion, any political stance, any policy, any personal belief, even if you think it's your own rational thought, whether it is or is not could be a whole nother discussion, but even if you don't realize it's probably generational family conditioning that's been handed down to you from, really toxic, periods in the past. Any model that anyone, to keep it really general, I'm not trying to accuse anyone in particular, and that's a standing disclaimer. I often get a little slippery with my language, and I forget that people might take it real personal, and I mean this in the broadest theoretical sense. Any conceptualization like that in adhering to it, in ruminating and thinking about it and agreeing with it and deciding to commit to quote-unquote believing in it, if it leads you down the ego trap, down the throat of the ego trap, the slippery slope throat of this nearly invisible but incredibly disgusting intellectual, emotional, spiritual ego trap of judging others, specifically and especially not specifically, but especially targeting specific groups of others, judging them in ways that sound rational, but that ultimately, really, if you think about it, are irrational, and lumping them together into some evil coalition of all those that are unworthy, ... that you, because of your adherence to this ideology, have come to believe or chosen to believe or have concluded that the belief is accurate or true or worth believing, that they need to be, challenged in violent ways. If you're not questioning that, I propose, the world needs to contemplate that is a form of manipulating those who choose to buy into it, right? I mean, to many, it's obvious. And to those who are like, duh, obviously, that's obvious. But to some, and there's a slivery Venn diagram overlap here, to some, which are many, tragically, it isn't obvious. They may even accuse others of being brainwashed, and it is not obvious to them that their judgmental, satirical, poo-pooing statements, comments, throwaway statements, humor, jokes, memes, perpetuate a telekinetic, psychic, spiritual energy that is toxic and corrosive. And when people, from experience, both observing it up close in others and living through momentary lapses of proper discernment, when people live under the influence of an ideological construct that either overtly or insidiously, like subversely, subtly, quietly, insidiously, sort of in a hidden, camouflage kind of way, leads especially young, impressionable people, but anybody of any age, at any class or condition, down the path of going, yup, all those over there, insert whatever labels, they're the evil ones, and we gotta fight. Insert here all the things we explored in the episode about like why we fight. I've done at least one episode that's explicitly in the title about people fighting, and of course I've found my way into discussing that issue on various episodes as well. I recently shared a meme, reshared it instantly, saw it, said, got to share that. It's us versus them, right, in the first frame, and it's really up close, and it's a group of people, and it's another group of people. And then it's just the same image, but you keep getting a broader and broader perspective until the planet's a tiny dot. And it's a cliche. It's a cliche like the statement that human beings are as infinitely diverse and yet radically kind of all the same the way snowflakes are, right? And of course, snowflake, the word, the label, the derogatory diss, the insult has now become a whole nother monstrosity, and it always gets conflated into things. But I digress. Language. There's a whole nother theme we've discussed in various episodes. Pins on the corkboard. Connect the dots for yourself. Language and the way we use it. We think about it in all the wrong ways most of the time when we're not paying attention. We think about it in absolutist terms. Like that word has always meant this, it'll always mean that. People have always been this way, things have always been that way. No, good sir. Language and culture and attitudes are obviously always fluid and dynamic. Now things build momentum, and tragically in these here, them United States of America, for reasons that are obviously intertwined and interconnected to anything and everything having to do with Trump's bizarre and way out of whack presidential administration. And you can just visit any and every episode of Good Morning Trumtopia to listen to my commentary in real time, friends. Right there in the breaking moment of trying to wrap my brain around what this guy was doing in office. Did I pretend to be right all the time? Absolutely not. Was I right all the time? Who knows? I don't know. But I've definitely been consistent in the kinds of questions I've been asking and in the concerns about what kinds of directions things seem to be pointing in. Humble flex, despite his own deflections and denials and everyone rallying to his defense about him not being a racist, we are where we are today because the militant Christian white nationalist movement, which is inherently racist, whether they talk about it in racist terms or not, whether they think of themselves as in racist terms or not, anyone who self-identifies and believes in being a militant Christian white nationalist is inherently racist. And that movement, which has been around for a long time, friends, and is, of course, not Trump's fault. I've never pretended to say that. But that movement has, for all the reasons that we've been calling out for, because I'm not alone in this, right? I wish I had guests and hosts and all that, but I've never had the wherewithal and the capital investment income to be like, boom, I can pay people to be here. Boom, I can hire staff to help me organize. Boom, I can have all the best equipment to, like, not yet, getting there one day. Please, fingers crossed, manifest an exponentially growing audience. Thank you. But when I say that, plenty of us have been calling this out, it's because it's been an issue. And plenty of different voices, whether we know each other or not. And we can't all be lumped together into one big, evil, nefarious group that's out to destroy Donald Trump, because that's garbage. This has been going on since Ronald Reagan was in office, and that's when I got here, right? Like I started saying, I'm a foreigner in this strange and magical place. And so, to many, my opinion means little at all. In fact, to those who literally believe with blind faith in this so-called, and I use dripping sarcasm and disgust quotes when I talk about the quote-unquote white replacement theory, not only is it garbage, not only is it obviously manipulative, not only is it obviously loaded with neurolinguistic programming, not only is it obviously some newest generation, next-gen co-opting of ye olde ancient tactics going back throughout history used to pit people against each other in a pointless us versus them wedge issue dynamic. Not only is it categorically un-American, according to the America that we all collectively agree to aspire and strive to be, which is where the patriotism is supposed to go, as far as I understood, from the Americans that taught me about what America was. And I'm lucky, I suppose. But let me be very real about something, folks, and we'll take a quick musical break to cleanse the palate. Everything that I say about this country, A, is rooted in love and respect. I love this country. I want it to be freer of corruption. I'm no fool. I'm not naive. I realize all countries are riddled with corruption. That's no excuse. And I've never defended any country's corruption. So the whataboutist argument, what about when America? Of course, yeah, it's a terrible one. Duh. And I've probably been one of the people that gets shushed and sidelined and marginalized and called kooky crazy when certain critiques were discussed and openly addressed in public discourse. I'm not a hater. I love this place. But for a very long time, and I'm saying even as a child, this was obvious to me, and I don't say that to be rude. It's just true. But for my entire adult life, it has been painfully obvious because of the simple and stupid and random weirdo fact that although I'm a native-born foreigner with long roots in that foreign country, one that is often stereotyped and ridiculed and mocked and hated on and oppressively attacked and, targeted by right-wing ideology, I look and sound the way I look and sound. I look and sound like a white guy on TV. And bless it, I wouldn't mind being a working television actor, with the kind of income to live, not in the rat's nests of Hollywood, but just far enough away where it's not too horrible of a drive and I can afford to pay someone to drive me so I can work my side hustles on the commute. But that's a whole nother pipe dream from when I was a teenager that never, as of yet, has come to be. If that reality, that I'm a foreigner, makes you uncomfortable, makes you dislike me, makes you discredit anything and everything I've got to say, then bless your heart, here's the exit, head on out and go echo chamber yourself in a place that makes you comfortable. But that's exactly what I'm speaking out against. And if anyone's bold enough, anyone's a little wigged out. I mean, one of the reasons that I don't often talk about this is because I don't mind if someone identifies with me as similar enough to them as a quote-unquote white American, white Caucasian American, which I could play on TV and movies for days and no one... I could have had a 15 or 25 year long television, theater, and movie career this entire time and played mostly generic, no races indicated characters, and most of the world would have just quietly assumed that I was, a generic Caucasian American. But I'm so technically not. And despite the way I sound and despite the way I look, there are ingredients and realities and aspects and movements and phenomena and people and ideologies and beliefs in this country that are part and parcel of living here, that are woven into the very fabric of reality. Because that, at an esoteric level, is something that literally happens in nation states, even though we don't talk about that. But that's a whole nother level of the show. Put a pin in that. We'll talk about that on a more transcendental segment of when it's just the ZenCast. Or Today's Negative Zen, one of those shows. But then again, I am a cannabis mystic, so it's very appropriate to talk about it now. That could be dismissed as just a crazy thing I believe in. But, that kind of stuff is also phenomenologically verifiable. But put a pin up on the corkboard. We want to talk about some, let's not get distracted by that. Let's not get derailed. I said I was going to put some music on to cleanse the palate in a hot second. But I haven't really driven home my point. My entire adult lifetime of experience, right? And that experience is nearly doubled if you consider just the entire time since I landed here, right? And the first place we went to was Disneyland. The very first full day after having arrived, not fully understanding that I was going to live here for the rest of my life. That's neither here nor there. There's one really weird and solid critique about this country that I can make as a loving, permanent, legal resident alien that doesn't want to cause so much trouble as to get booted out. But hey, if we believe in the multicultural aspirational vision of reality, if that's the true normative center and everyone else that isn't Cookie Nut's job, no offense, but you are Cookie Nut jobs, you guys. The derangement syndrome is not on the oppositional coalition of the people who are opposed to Trump. The derangement, sadly, tragically, is in all those who pray and believe in Trump. Pray about, for, in favor of, in support of Trump. Because there's some huge disconnect, but we'll get into that. That's just a symptomology, right? Like Trumptopia happening is just because that rich guy who could see the levers ready to be pulled, who could see the momentum ready to be capitalized on, decided to do it. Any other rich, and it's funny to call Trump a rich white guy because he's not so rich and he ain't so white looking. He's way more orange looking than me. He's way darker than I am. As I used to almost proudly boast, I have been called by both white people and non-white people who are either very inexperienced with Hispanic, Latino Americans, whatever you want to call us, or very experienced, like the full spectrum of other people, foreigners, Americans, non-Americans, have literally encountered me, dealt with getting to know me beyond the surface impression and into the discussion of where are you from, really? Right? And it's always interesting when they add the really. I mean, I'm always a little what does it matter where I'm from? I'm here now. I've lived here for epically stupid long now. What does it matter where I'm from? But I digress. Not everyone. So many people from so many different kinds of backgrounds and mentalities and political affiliations have said, damn, boy, you're the whitest Mexican I've ever met. Now, obviously I was being funny with the way I said it. They've said it all a bunch of different ways. But Mexicans, not Mexicans in Mexico. Mexicans in Mexico think this is absolutely absurd, right? Because I do go back to Mexico on occasion. And I was going with not saying the nation of origin to be mildly mysterious. And that may be my fictional place of origin. Maybe my real life place of origin is somewhere even weirder. Who knows? When in the Zeppoverse, you're never really quite sure whether the fiction is mirroring reality and being weirder than reality, or if reality is weirder than the fiction. But I digress. Let's run with Mexico for now. But what does it really matter where I'm from? There's a lot of people from a lot of places. If there's one group I really sort of feel interestingly cross-identifiable with, it's people from whatever place that live here in America, and that most people sort of absentmindedly just presume are Americans and come from some family that's been Americans forever and whatever. You just look kind of American to me, you know? As opposed to like, there's a Mexican, there's an Italian, there's a whatever, there's a people we don't like right now. Right? But they are technically, as we all commonly might be, a group of people that those people will be like, well, I don't like you. You know, you're one of them bad groups of people. We are an interesting, weird slice of Americana, and we deserve more visibility. There, I said it. And we are getting more visibility, actually. A lot of people from a lot of different backgrounds have been saying it's really interesting that, you know, there was just this really great movie, I forget on what streaming platform, explicitly about the much more familiar, much more sort of traditionally like recognized and discussed situation when African Americans are considered to be passing. That technically applies to me. And some people will say that with just mild curiosity. Oh yeah, you definitely pass for white. Some people will say that very judgmentally, as if I'm doing it on purpose. Like they're going to judge me for passing. I'm like, bro, I was born this way. And it's not my fault that I'm really good at learning things. Okay? Now, I'm not judging anybody else from another foreign country. English sucks. Languages are complicated and complex, and therefore kind of suck to learn after you've just learned a whole nother language that you were born into, and then suddenly get yourself uprooted without a complete understanding of how the world works and are forced to totally learn a whole new thing. That's the reality. Why we judge each other about it, I don't get. Okay, I've been rambling for 42 minutes and 22 seconds. DJ Zed is just sitting there in the corner, quite stoically, irritated. That one, the judgment eyebrow, the eyebrow of judgment is up at maximum elevation. Here, for your audio entertainment friends, is a fresh, hot little track entitled Translucent Visionaries Dancing, a Remix Live Acid Techno Volume 2 collaboration with digital invisible collaborators, and of course, DJ Zed and the Me, Myself, and I crew at CTAG Studios. Dropping the robot dance music beats known as Discotheque Synthetica. Music from across the Zeppoverse You can catch up with the latest, hottest tracks, the freshest tracks, tracks that have never been played on this podcast, tracks that have been featured prominently on this podcast, and tracks in the development area in between over on SoundCloud.com/Mr. Thank you for your support in that way. For those of you who head on over there and like this stuff. We're back into chat mode, friends, as I tune out this track. Just teasing you with half the track. There's a whole nother half the track to get through. It's actually only like 1 minute and 40 seconds left, but it's a really great ending. This one's currently podcast exclusive. It hasn't been featured on anything else. Today's its first day getting played in the Zeppoverse platforms of music sharing modalities. What were we talking about? Friends, I can say it plainly. And I say this with as much compassion, love, forgiveness, and healing energy as you can possibly imagine, emanating through my body and broadcasting out both in my words and in the telekinetic psychic network of the human species. America is a bizarre and wild, wonderful place. And it has a deep-rooted, enduring, and now currently highly motivated ethno-nationalist movement. And it's a plain old stark reality that I think I have bluntly addressed on more than one or two or many multiple occasions during the 5.5, almost 6 years of this podcast. And that I've discussed openly with folks, those who feel otherified and those who feel very in the center of the mainstream throughout my entire adult life, interacting with people and engaging in public discourse, whether on electronic media or otherwise. And let me tell you one of the simplest, realest things about my life. I no longer do this or describe myself as such a person, but I once went through a phase of being very much like a night owl and enjoying going to bars and going out there to socialize, right? To mix it up and mingle and meet people and get into random conversations with strangers and bartenders and whatnot. And also, sort of independent of that particular reality, I no longer do that a lot, especially now during the pandemic, which is now what? It's officially no longer... It's not over, but it's no longer it's no longer going to be hyper sensationalized because no one gives a F anymore. And although we haven't declared an end to the emergency, we're just going to hope that the people who are going to do the diligent precautionary measures are enough. I guess that's where we're at. Independent of all that, I'm just I no longer have that sort of craving in me to go out and honestly, there's ways in which that can be quite dangerous, which can be a whole nother special series we could do. Not judging anything or anyone, just stating realities. But back in those days, when I was a young lad that loved to walk into a pub, especially if I was on the road for whatever the various reasons I might be on the road, as in like not in my hometown, either kind of sort of locally or further abroad here in the United States. And I have done my fair share of, getting around and visiting different places. I couldn't pretend to even know the list of different states that I visited in my lifetime of living here, but it's more than 3, I can assure you. Regardless of that, whether it's been in New York or Los Angeles, or, those are 2 big metropolitan cities, or some middle of nowhere town with just a couple of dive bars and a diner, people are often, not always, are often curiously drawn to me. And for some reason, quite unavoidably, on many, many occasions, not every time I've ever walked into a bar, but way too many times that I've ever just walked into a bar because I wanted to sit down and enjoy myself and socialize and mingle for, a couple of hours, later into the evening, and then, head back to the hotel or whatever and crash out. I have ultimately encountered that it's redonkulously common to be approached, especially by slightly older, obvious barfly regulars, and be sort of curiously probed to see if it's cool to talk racisty around me, because they're not quite sure. I lost count of how many times some otherwise really rather friendly, old, bearded, grandfatherly type old bar dude has, settled up next to me and chatted me up just long enough to either casually drop some epithet and then stare at me inquisitively, or inculcate me in clearly, as in a way as if like they're trying to be intimidating, trying to sort of get me to just automatically agree to some coded, dog whistly, or plain straight up racist claim. Anybody who's ever been sort of shocked to encounter a racist individual in public who's comfortable flirting with or broaching that taboo, or crossing that line, can relate that, this is way more common than I think if we were to aggregately combine all sort of social self-awareness and commentary. Most people don't have this on their radar. And when it crops up, it gets swept away and minimized. And I can understand. For generations now, we have indeed lived under the overall sort of general conceptual framework that we've come a long way and made huge strides and made lots of progress, not to like dip into the progressive ideological construct and its triggering of much hate from certain particular directions, but progress in its more pure form towards a multicultural melting pot America of equity and equality and fairness for all. Right? Where no one is above anyone else, which I think is what is originally in its more innocent interpretations or instances of use, such terms as no one should be above the law or no one is above the law are meant by people, right? Clearly, to acknowledge and fend off the critique to that phrasing, that no one is above the law can very easily be used or accused of being part of an indoctrination towards a sort of, oppressive, bootlicking acceptance of some sort of police state or tyranny of the law. Duh. That's always true. What's the point of having laws? Like, the idea that we should live in some misconstrued notion of what the Wild West mighta, coulda, shoulda, woulda people thought it was, which I don't even know that it ever really truly was, except for when you were in actual, non-colonized territory and you were dealing with outlaws and bandits and essentially land pirates. But then again, we romanticize the bad guys, and we have for millennia, since before America existed. Clearly, in white European culture, there's some weird, interesting literary and pop cultural subgenre of admiring and glorifying certain kinds of bad guys, or certain kinds of outlaws, or certain kinds of whatever. We use a lot of language to sort of define them as other than just straight up criminals, right? Even though they live and walk and breathe and work and commit crimes amongst the criminal class and are indeed often leaders of it, whatever. But from the adoration in American cinema of gangland, fictional gangland, mob boss characters, to the sort of fetishistic, cinematic, and histrionic trend towards very concerning fixation on World War II and the hows and whys and mechanics of the Nazi movement. Complex and complicated, right? And as many of the whataboutists love to throw in, people are racist regardless of what race they are. Yeah, of course, duh, that happens. There's no such thing as reverse racism. There's just racism, yo. In America, it has classically been white against black. Around the world, it's typically been colonizer against colonized. So, I mean, in America, there was a time when Italians and the Irish weren't white enough, yo. And that's just a real hardcore fact. No, I don't got historical references and I don't got papers and links, but do your own research. I'm well researched enough to speak with confidence that I'm not making something up, right? And I try not to make something up. Obviously, I also don't run around believing that I'm 100% super informed and authoritatively an authority about anything. I'm just a dude trying to present a talk show podcast that's co-branded with some literature, sci-fi literature that has a critical view of the world around him, right? And it is what it is. I love this place. I love all the places. Some of the places have serious corruption issues. Some of the places have even more serious corruption issues than that. Some of the places have less corruption issues. Some of the places just sort of pretend that they don't have corruption. Corruption is a human species problem. I was thinking earlier and failed to capture on tape, but it's coming back to me now, so that's good. Because usually they never come back. But we would not have, this is a statement I almost lost earlier while doing something. We would not have nation states and borders and ideologies around patriotism and us versus them conceptualizations about good countries and bad countries if we hadn't spent millennia fighting in a tribalistic us versus them. Those grunty people over there want to take all the fruit from these bushes over here. Right? We established boundaries because we couldn't learn how to share across tribes. And I'm talking about way back. And yes, I accept that some form of an evolutionary process happened. I don't blindly just believe anything quote-unquote evolutionary science tells me. I'm always critical and ask my questions and whatnot, but it's clear. The human genome is a verifiable real thing. We can clone other animals because the living genome is a simple, real, verifiable thing. And it also fits quite nicely into the entire fractal geometric puzzle of a living fractal consciousness that is manifesting the flesh reality of life forms. But that's a whole nother episode, friends. Put a pin on the corkboard because I've talked about it before and I'm sure we'll come full circle to talk about it again in the not too distant future. Ideology has this problem inherently embedded in it, in my humble opinion. An evolutionarily developed behavioral flaw, which is the whole kit and caboodle of us versus them tribalistic, we must butcher each other in order to survive kind of thinking. Eliminationist rhetoric, etc. Any of the postmodern things that can be derived from the fundamentals of a sort of anthropological analysis of wow, look at the brutality with which groups of primitive people dealt with each other when they couldn't figure out a way to collaborate. I've got some breaking news, folks. It's 2022. We do not need to create ideologies that have this critical flaw in it anymore. We do not need to adhere to critically flawed ideologies that we've been fighting and killing each other over for God knows how long anymore. We do not need to butcher each other over resources anymore. We're literally living in the future. And we're beating each other like cave people as if we couldn't satisfy everyone's needs and lift everyone into healing and self-improvement. What's keeping us? What is keeping us as a collective, right? As a species that has achieved personhood, born of this massive, living, cosmic uterus or womb, which often is misheard or mistranslated by auto text to text, voice to text as room. Every time I say living womb, I get living room. And it frustrates me. But I mean living, this womb that is alive. Planet Earth is a womb. Therefore, it is alive. It gives birth to life. Life was given rise to it. And it is a living system of systems. It just operates at a place that's orders of magnitude different than our own. But without it, we would not exist. So we could be focused and very efficiently busy with the kinds of choice making, with the kind of critical thinking, with the kind of public discourse, with the kind of behavioral development, with the kind of individual and collective healing that would cumulatively and quite literally solve the problems that we as a collective have created for ourselves. And I get it. All the whataboutist arguments and the dismissive sidestepping arguments of like, I'm not responsible for the rest of humanity's clusterfuck. Of course not. No one's trying to send you off to jail because your great somebody was a colonizing a-hole. It's not about that. But it's about acknowledging the impact of all of that and acknowledging the impact of the spiritual, psychological, emotional, body chemistry trauma, which is at the center and the root cause of the corruption that we call racism or ethno-nationalism or militant Christian wackadoodleism, because that's crazy to me. A strapped Jesus is effing insane to me. Like we need to stop that. And by stop, I don't mean go to war with it and kill them all. Like that's insane, right? We cannot become bad guys to end bad guys' activities. And I will stand by that quite adamantly. But we are living through a moment. Thank God that, and I mean this quite seriously, and I said this on the podcast the minute it was official, that we're not living in any of the probability waveform function branches that would be unfolding, and theoretically are, because in some corner of the multiverse, it did happen, tragically, for all those people living through it. But the second, like a second term. Because no matter how you slice it, and no matter, in spite of, regardless of all the sidestepping and attempts to clear his name of being one or being a racist, that part's almost irrelevant at this point. The militarized, militant thinking, violence-prone, very misled, severely traumatized, in my opinion, because the whole human species is severely traumatized. I'm not trying to be a jerk and judge any particular group of people. The whole human species is deeply traumatized, friends. But this particular movement of deeply traumatized people that are fixated on an ethno-nationalist militant Christianity, taking over and reforming the tools of government in the image of some kind of fake democracy, theocracy, fake American theocratical, autocracy that pretends to vote some people in and whatnot. Clearly that's a vibe that's been vibing around the world. Look around. And it must be healed because it's an entire set of complicated and complex symptomologies. And that's where I think I'm hopefully contributing something that I think some of us, and I don't know who I'm referring to, I'm just people out there get and understand, but isn't a strong topic of discussion in order to hopefully, spread awareness and facilitate comprehension. That this stuff is deeply rooted in psycho-emotional, spiritual, metaphysical trauma, cancer, whatever you want to call it. The language fails, right? Let's remember that. One of the biggest things on the board is that when we start to approach any discussion about the metaphysical, the transcendental, the spiritual, it has to be understood before you can get into that discussion. That no matter what I say, no matter what you say, all we can really try to do is agree on whether or not there's some sort of common phenomenological experience we've both experienced, and recognize that language fails. And that, there are many paths. There are as many paths as there are individuals. And that's even deeper and more complicated than we, can begin to understand at first blush. But I digress. The core, right? We as a collective created these toxic situations. We created a tribalistic us versus them pattern that has been propagated and inculcated and infused into almost everything. From sports to brand adherence to brand comedy marketing to to politics to family feuds to us versus them tribalistic thinking and sort of deep-seated nonverbal emotional trauma manipulation is just sort of par for the course in this society. And fighting about it, arguing about it, accusing each other about it, taking sides about it, not taking sides about it, etc. That in and of itself, in my humble opinion, is just skating on the surface. And what we need to do is break down into the surface, dive down deep, and find the healing sources of healing. Like somewhere, if we're working with a frozen lake analogy, and I know it's counterintuitive, where it's a frozen lake, but deep down there's like warming geysers that are blocked up, and that to heal, we need to dive down deep into this freezing water, which is the murkiness of the human mind / soul interface, and the ideology that we cultivate, that we get indoctrinated with, that we develop on our own, that we encounter in social groups, both in real life and online settings, right? These issues are huge concerns. Now, we can get into some sort of dystopian, monolithic nanny state, or we can get into some sort of Wild West, toxic, fume-filled, what's his name? What's the Mad Max kind of, hyper-libertarianistic dystopia, or we can effing heal. And I know that sounds like a cliche, but it's both simultaneously more than and one and the same as, like, yeah, it's kind of a cliche, but it's a cliche that's got deep, profound truth right at its gooey, nuggety center. Because no one is so well that they would not benefit from more healing. And that's a hard pill to swallow, because lots of people are fighting to retain the purely subjective notion that they're trying to objectify as opposed to recognize an objective reality. It's two different things. And objectifying is not quite the same thing as manifesting. that everything's fine and good and they're going to be okay and that nothing's going to happen to them, right? But we are all deeply scarred. Psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, energetically, physically. The world we have been born into, doesn't matter how old you are or how young you are, has been toxic from day one. In every angle, every dimension, every modality, everything you can criticize. And I don't say that with hate. I don't say that to say, and therefore it is evil and those people are wrong and we must fight again. No. It has been like this for a very long time. And the reason it perpetuates is, or at least seems to be, let me be very precise with my language, it seems to be because we collectively, and we have to take responsibility, in my humble opinion, that way, collectively. If we get caught up in like, well, those people over there are a little bit more responsible than my people over here, and well, this one guy over here is a real raging dickwad, he's really responsible. That's great, but it's besides the point. How does any of that solve anything? We collectively, I mean, boldly, even a purely innocent person that's like, too young of a person just now coming of age to even remotely, they could, should, would still take on this notion for the collective ownership of it, that we collectively, generationally, are, going back generations and generations, created this mess. There are no flesh-eating lizards or laser-shooting robots or blah, 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 from the Bible, satanic demons to blame. I mean, if there are, I sure as fuck haven't been able to meet them yet and have a discussion with them about what the hell they're up to. And I realize, forgive the redundancy, but fundamental to my worldview, I could be wrong about anything and everything about it. About what I say here in this episode and in every episode I've put out in my journey of audio blog, podcasting, talk shows, stunting, whatever this is. But I say to you with earnestness and with the humble and authentic sensation that it is genuinely part of the truth. We must heal. What is the meaning of life? Healing. We've been waxing poetic and debating and fighting and literally butchering each other, if I may include myself as a member of the human species. To many people, I appear to not to belong. And some people are convinced I'm not a human being. But I also consider myself a citizen of the universe and of the multiverse. And that life is one visually incongruent, but metaphysically, metacosmically, intra-connected and singular force in the world. As weird as that construction was, I think it rings true. Prove me wrong. I don't mean I'll be happily change my mind. Life is life. And life is food because life consumes life in nature. So let's not get into that argument. And plant life is capable of sensing pain and of being conscious and aware of its surroundings, no matter how much you want to pretend that it's not. There's enough science to make that statement without doubt. It's subtle, it's weird, it's goofy, and it's plant-like, but it is consciousness, and it is a form of pain experience. We're here to find ways to heal, in my humble opinion. And there may be bizarre, strange, and typically unforeseeable phenomena that may be invoked beyond that which we even understand, even amongst those who consider themselves well-informed spiritualists, if we truly, genuinely, authentically achieve species-wide unity in the effort of manifesting what might be called metaphysical, transdimensional, third eye opening, species-wide, all-inclusive, transformative, physical, mental, energetic, spiritual healing. It's a very clunky label. But I pack all that into the word, all caps, healing. I'll be dismissed, I'm sure I have been in the past in people's minds, as a oh, you're no different than the snake oil salesman, faith healers. And I don't know. I've often been a critic of faith healers because it's quite irresponsible, especially when spirituality and medicine are not mutually exclusive. They are not enemies. Corruption is occurring in both. Thank you very much. To purposefully prevent people while at the same time taking their money. Because that ain't any of the shit I'm doing. I'm not talking about... In fact, I'm making a massive, and I have always been making a massive criticism of the deep, problematic flaws with postmodern Christianity. And that criticism is not limited to the extreme ethno-nationalist expressions of Christianity, but in general, even the more benign, more open-minded, more inclusive, they're still sort of generally not presenting Christ correctly and not really doing what Jesus taught. But it's a spectrum of experience. There's also Christ-oriented churches and Christians that very much so are, right? Or at least in a way that's much more closer to what we can piece together might have been than anything else on the other end of the spectrum. But I digress, right? That critique, that argument, that entire problem, and that spectromatic view can be applied to each and every single religion in the world. And arguably, Trumpianism or Trumpian thinking qualifies as, a cult on the verge of wanting to become a religion. It's a mind cult. It's a cult of personality. It's a political cult. And it has been, from the get-go, quite disingenuously, in my humble opinion, for Trump is quite plainly a bogus Christian who does not read the Bible, who doesn't go to church very much, and who doesn't really understand any of the history, any of the teachings, any of the problematic issues with the complexity that is Christendom, if we may call it that. People might disagree because that's technically a very specifically Catholic term from ye olde dark ages, when the only brand or variety or version or flavor of Christianity was the Roman Catholic Empire. But let's digress. Life is spiritual, but it does not need to be religious. It most especially does not need to be egregiously, ethno-religiously militant in its statehood, in its state apparatuses. That is a corruption of what mythic, spiritual, mystic, as I bumble some of my words and mispronounce things as my brain gets cross-wired. One thing I've found in my lifetime of curiosity and exploring different religions, because that's been a real thing, from the very first time I sat in a Catholic catechism class, CCD, as we used to call it, for reasons I never really quite understood because I never quite caught the full acronym. And asked questions of the teacher that they got flummoxed about because the Bible and the text therein clearly contains some problematic issues and content and statements and claims and descriptions about what is and is not the deity we're supposed to be worshiping and the religion we're supposed to be practicing. So from even longer ago and before I began, observing and questioning and asking, questions about politics, I was asking questions about religion. And in multiple phases of my life, I have spent part of my leisure time, part of my self-improvement time, part of my recreational time, engaging in a self-conducted autodidactic exploration of world religions and various expressions of the different faiths that we can find around the world. And just like with politics, I find that there are nuggets of interesting realities, gems of truth, beautiful aspirational ideas, benign ideological constructs, and then problematic ideological constructs riddled with problematic ingredients, including but not limited to obvious neurolinguistic programming, psychological manipulation, bias, conditioning, etc. We do this to ourselves in every marketplace, folks. It's so pervasive that it almost literally would take a space alien or a traveler from another time frame or another timeline or another dimension or another universe to point it out in a way that makes sense after having been stuck here long enough to really wrap my brain around it. I mean, their brain around it. And thus the literature that I'm creating. Thus the character that I fondly, comedically, satirically self-identify as. The incorrigible Mr. Zeppo is here to point out to humanity, you're all tripping. Y'all in glass houses, no matter who you are, no matter how good you believe yourself to be, and that's okay, because it's part of the human condition you have created for yourselves here, generationally speaking. And none of you are immediately, personally, directly responsible for it. Even those of you in the high echelons of legitimate power of the nation states and or the weirdo powers of the other orbs of power in the way the whole Mishigas works. But everyone, independent of race, creed, religion, origin of birth, etc., has the opportunity sitting plainly before them, quite literally deep within them, to step up into the responsibility of taking responsibility for solving the problems we collectively, generationally created for ourselves in our past lives. We have always been each other, folks. That's the big secret that other people might charge you millions of dollars to get around to finally telling you. To the best of my understanding, both from analytical research and analysis of religious texts, philosophical musings, personal anecdotal reportings from people and their near-death experiences, and my own personal lived experiences through phenomena that no one can talk me out of understanding were real phenomena. No one's doubt can penetrate the reality of knowing that certain things I've lived through really effing happened to me. So, in the Trumpian scope of this discussion as a mix and match episode, no one can mock, ridicule, shame, marginalize, dismiss, or whataboutismistically approach me, convince me into dismissing that America has always had, since as long as you guys have been arguing about it, had a problem with a white nationalist, racist sub-current of thought that gets propagated inside of family homes. You don't need some external villainous, mysterious group somewhere, although there probably are. I'm not going to get into that argument now. There are fundamental ideological problems that require no oppressive, shadowy figures to indoctrinate you into, because it happens in the homes of people, from parents to children, from grandparents to grandchildren, from generation to generation, from generation to generation. And it's rooted in stuff that predates all of our bullshit ideology about it anyways. The reason some people can and will easily believe that there is a quote-unquote natural order to things, wherein certain kinds of folk like my own should stand in superior and elite position above others, which I do not believe, folks. I'm making fun of that idea. But the reason I think, based on my observations, etc., that some people can fall into that belief so easily is because there is a deep-seated trauma and sort of genetic memory of the fiercely competitive eras when we lived by tooth and nail, literally. Our clawing our way across the evolutionary landscape from competitive creatures, literally. And let's not get into the ridiculous argument about whether or not we came, quote unquote, from monkeys or not. Evolution doesn't work that way, yo. It is more accurate to say that apes and monkeys and everybody else and people came from the same common ancestry of everything that has a genome in it. So that argument is pointless. We didn't come from monkeys. Well, we can't come monkeys this, monkeys that. Who cares about monkeys? We share 75% genetic material with cabbage, for shit's sake. Pardon the brusque way in which I say that. It's just exhausting, right? To hear people, right? One of the other levels that this moment in Trumptopia is exhausting. Oh, wait, put a pin in that for a hot second momentarily. So in the political sphere of things, right, like the entire right-wing, militant, pseudo-Christian, fake Christian, ethno-nationalist ideological construct is deeply flawed because Jesus would stop you all in a heartbeat. If Jesus were to literally come back floating down from the heavens, clouds parting, the sun mysteriously, magically, impossibly, behind his head directly so that it coronates like a freaking solar eclipse. And if he did that, which, you know what? Honestly, as a person who believes he has an actual, like, spiritual, energetic connection to Christos, I'd welcome it. Because one of the first things, if not the very first thing, he would set about doing in his embodied form with a plain old regular squishy sack of blood and bone is stop and go, what on earth are all of you people doing in my name? I say that in quotes, right? I don't believe that I am Jesus, and anybody who believes that they are Jesus is simultaneously both completely wrong and kind of sort of 3/4 right, because we are all the Christ. Yo, that's what Jesus taught, not whatever the Nazis believed, because they were all pretendo Christians too. They were all radically fake ethno-nationalists co-opting organized religion with its roots in a spiritual entheogenic practice of liberating the mind from the tribalistic us versus them thinking that one of us, some group of us is better than the other group of us because we are all the genome making these flesh pods and, consciousness imbuing it with aliveness. And that consciousness, wherever it magically comes from, is the Christ being. That's what Jesus taught. And if he showed up right now in a body, if he decided to suddenly just go, okay, fuck off, I'm showing up, since you all been praying for me to do it anyways, he sure as hell wouldn't show up to pat the white nationalists with the foaming at the mouth need to start a race war on the back and say, good job, fellas, because he was a dark-skinned, dark-haired, dark-eyed Palestinian-born Israeli, Middle Eastern, person, not a blonde-haired, blue-eyed, white-skinned sociopath. So there was an opportunity for every Christian, every self-proclaimed Christian, to stand up and say, sorry, brothers in Christ, but no. Now, I know I just said that almost zero Christian churches getting it right, but that's a whole different discussion, right? I try to also, I bring a lot of critique to the Christian spectrum of ideology because I once deeply believed in being Christian. I once wanted to be one with Christ. And then I realized that we are already, and all this ideological bifurcation and separatism and calling ourselves by different names and making fun of each other by all these different traditions, and then, turning a blind eye when some people that call themselves Christians do horrible things, is part of the problem here on Earth that has evolved in the postmodern era, since the sort of the beginning of the decline of the Roman Catholic Empire, which once had a stranglehold on anything and everything that was Christianity. And politics, in a world where there was no separation of church and state. But at the same time, I'm not out to hate Christians, yo. I want to be counted as one also, but most wouldn't. And I'm not even worried about the ones that are just plain old racist and don't want Christians being anything but white. That's a whole level of crazy that we've already addressed. Dear brothers in Christ, whatever denomination, dear brothers and sisters in Christ, forgive me, I didn't mean to sound chauvinistic, but this militant Christian white nationalist thing is very much a very chauvinistic thing too. We all must stand in collaborative coalition of saying no and articulating our reasons why, so that our brothers in Christ, our sisters in Christ, who are either turning a blind eye or nodding along but not doing much, or openly agreeing and actually trying to perpetuate this garbage, so that they can have the opportunity to reconnect with their Christ spirit within as well. So that they can, and you know what? This exact same statement, by the way, for context, for a big reality zoom out reality check, this exact same discussion would be had about the Buddhists in Myanmar that have turned crazy pseudo-religious ethno-nationalists and are trying to obliterate oh snap, I just lost the label for the name of the Karinja, the something in, not the Uyghurs are in China, but yeah, it's a human problem, folks. And all of the ideology that seduces people into believing in the corruptive ego traps that lead people towards that space, where they then allow themselves to conduct violence against others in the name of their religion, in the name of their country, in the name of whatever ideology whatsoever. There is I lost my train of thought. There was going to be a next thing I was going to say, and I forgot what it is. But we can't fight this, right? We can't legislate this away. We can try, but down that path, there is a lot of temptation to become the fascist state that they're all fear-mongering about. It requires healing. Imagine I don't like what if theoreticals too much, but when they're used to promote wonky ideas that have faulty logic, right? And they often are. But let's imagine a world let's imagine a universe. Let's get it really big. Let's broaden it out. Because this world is not just one world, friends. and put a pin in that on the board. We've already talked about it at length, and I don't want to inspire a lot of control about how each human is a fractal universe of a million universes, of an infinite array of. But I digress. Already talked about it. If you haven't heard it yet, you'll stumble across it. Just keep jumping around the episodes. I've done it recently. I've done it way in the past. In a world where that is so, I just invoked that. I referenced the pin in the board so that I don't have to spend an hour explaining it. And that if your curiosity leads you to need to know, you'll go and listen to the other episodes. But in a world where that is so, in a world of worlds, in a universe where that is the case, in a cosmos where that is the reality, and all problems stem from the denial, distraction, obfuscation, rejection, self-blindering of that reality. The fractal, recursive, holographic nature of reality. The reality we are each other and have always been each other. That it doesn't matter whether or not you can remember your past lives. You are you and me and everyone listening to this podcast. We are all each other. And everyone you've ever met, you are all of them. The thing that is you is like a snowflake, both incredibly unique in its experiencing this life that you are individually experiencing, and also bizarrely, universally, ubiquitously, magically unified in a strange kind of unity, the way every snowflake, no matter how infinitely, variably, differently structured in its crystalline form, is all just H2O, right? To tear the word snowflake back from the toxically abusive, bully, raging, petty-minded online social media playground brats that just want to take beautiful things and ruin them and then also use them to insult other people. Shame on you. Snowflake is a beautiful divine thing, and as an analogy, it deserves to be heralded and respected and admired for the literal, fractal, prismatic, brilliant analogy that it is. Your soul is the H2O. Your body is the crystalline structure, which is infinitely unique and yet essentially the same quixotic, magical, mystical thing as everyone else. And if we lived in a world where everyone didn't just go, oh, that's cool, man. Yeah, that's great, dude. Peace, man, bro, whatever. But understood it. You know, I was having a discussion on social media recently where people were like sort of analyzing a quote and it uses the word wisdom. And I'm like, well, there's like sort of the really worn out, threadbare, tore up pop cultural understanding of what wisdom is. And then there's the ancient various, because there's more than one, there's the various ways in which ancient mystical Aboriginal peoples, you know, might have used words in their culture that we would translate into the word wisdom. And one of them, some of them, many of them, there's a confluence of this that harmonizes in their own cultural expression into a different kind of signpost pointing to the same sort of realization. And that's that, like, wisdom, real wisdom, is the knowledge, the gnosis, the phenomenological understanding. And when understanding is based not on rhetorical statements insisted upon, demanded, bartered about with belief, but rather things experienced, events, phenomena. Phenomena. I cannot help myself every time, but it derails the whole thing, but it's also adorable, and it happens in my head anyways. Phenomenological experience is something, for those who may not know what that phrase represents really, is something that, like, I experienced it, I measured it, I thought about it, I found a way to describe it. You don't know it, you haven't experienced it, but you could, if you were open-minded enough, wrap your brain around my words and then have an intellectual understanding about it, and then go through whatever practice, conditions, or life experience that allowed me to experience it phenomenologically, and then have your own incredibly similar, hopefully accurate or at least accurate enough, to prove the description accurate enough, rather, but your own undeniable, real, tangible, personal, undebunkable, immediate, sensory, factual, phenomenological experience. That, it's an experience that happens through the phenomena of the sensory apparatuses and that can be confirmed, right? And verified and repeated independently. There is, I would propose to you to cross back over to the spiritual and transdimensional sides of this Mix and Match episode, quite a great deal of phenomena like this that are rare in terms of having been recorded and acknowledged and held up in some sort of cultural tradition in our world as we know it and we see it in this postmodern context now. Little known phenomena, rarely perceived or experienced phenomena. Phenomena that when experienced and perceived by individuals is often perplexing to others and therefore easily laughed off, dismissed, belittled, and quickly ignored. Not part of the collective gestalt, not recognized in our pop cultural norms, but that are very real, organic, strange, yes, quixotic, perhaps, illusory even. And there's several notes on the board about illusion, the word illusion, how it's used, how it's misused, and how we need to disambiguate all those before we can seriously talk about what is and isn't an illusion. But I digress. It's there on the board. You'll find it in the episodes. I wish I had the time and or the staff to provide my audience with a tangible, visual, maybe virtual corkboard that represents what I'm imagining in my mind. And for those who are lost whenever I reference that, in my room, there's a big blank space up on a wall that's technically over my left shoulder if you were watching me from a podcast position where a webcam might generally be placed here on my setup amongst all my other gear. And on that place, I tangibly, physically, constantly imagine an old school, and these used to be common at the mall, or in places like in stores like Staples or office supply spaces. They probably still do. They're just not as super common, probably because the tree is becoming extremely rare and therefore expensive, and the prices are going up, and then inflation and all that. But cork boards made out of cork, which curiously is a tree, not a sponge, but it looks like a sponge, but that's a whole other issue. And on the corkboard, I commonly imagine pinning up with big, giant, fat red pins, subjects or themes or collections of keywords that I think deserve special attention and should be sort of tracked as we engage with each other in these various episodes throughout time, both in the past and in the future. Is it just a cheap gimmick to get you to listen to more of my past episodes? Not originally, but am I sort of leaning on it that way a bit sometimes? Perhaps, but I think it's valid. Is it a real thing that I'm working with in terms of in the future, I will reference things that I've referenced before, and I want you to go, if we had a corkboard, I'd want you to be able to, if I really could have this device, it'd be like a thing on a website where you could look at the pin and, the label for the pin would say meditation. And you'd have several virtual pieces of paper pinned under that pin that have quotes from things I've said in various episodes with the title of the episode, the minute count where the quote begins and ends, and, the link to where you can find that episode. I wish I had the time and the resources and the energy and the staffing to provide that for you. Instead, dear audience, I humbly am trying to subtly seduce and inculcate you into just imagining it in your mind for yourself. As a running joke, perhaps, as a sort of cutesy thing that we do together. But because there's power in aggregate thought and in constant repeated discussion, I want you to approach the podcast in that way as you join me, myself, and I in a journey of discussing the wild, wacky, and ongoing shenanigans here in the land of what was once an idyllic melting pot known as the United States of America, in the pursuit of an ever more improving set of equality for all people of all kinds, and this dystopic pseudo ethno-nationalist militant Christian thing that may or may not continue to try to wave the banner of Trumptopia. And on that note, friends, I'm going to wrap this show up now because my throat is getting hoarse and I'm out of coffee, and I've already drank a whole tea and my other tea is cold. So it's time for me to go have brunch. Believe it or not, I have not broken fast since waking up this morning that I am aware of all day as of yet. Unless, of course, this mushroom beverage that I drink should technically count as food, because it is rather hearty in that way. It's light in mouthfeel, but hearty in its like, oof, it makes me feel satisfied. And that's abrupt and out of the blue. But there's a whole episode about coffee. Go find those. But there's a pin on the board. The coffee and the coffee alternative replacement saga episodes. Find them, listen to them. And should you randomly happen to be at this moment listening to the sound of my voice and be someone that's struggling with a lifelong love-hate coffee relationship, otherwise known as addiction, and I'm not judging you when I say that, I have a coffee problem. And I clearly still do, because I drink way as much of the mushroom coffee alternative, which I'm supposed to drink less of, and as I did of the the much less good for you, much more toxic for you coffee. Regular, standard, cheap ass, whatever was cheapest coffee. Go find those episodes and click through on the links, or search up the links, or hit me up for the discount links for any of the 3 coffee alternatives that I do drink, because they're awesome. Having spiraled way out of control at the end there, I will bid you a fond farewell and adieu, dear friends, by playing the second half of that track and letting DJ Zed play us out into the void of our mental space for a hot minute. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for considering the wild, crazy, racing, spiraling, thinking thoughts of this cartoonish character known as the incorrigible Mr. Zappa. I didn't talk about cannabis. Not very much anyways. Cannabis talk isn't necessarily exclusively just about, hyping cannabis culture. In fact, there's some problematic issues in this developing nouveau riche, burgeoning, very sort of bougie, post-California decriminalizing, movement of exponentially growing cannabis culture. And I will not tolerate being accused of just being a blind puppet to some nefarious cannabis industry. I am quite specific about where I stand with cannabis. She is a spiritual, healing, plant ally. I've talked about it before in the show in the big pin on the board. There's got to be a reason why we evolutionarily, biologically developed an endocannabinoid system. But we've talked about that before, and we'll talk about it again, I'm sure. I wanted to wrap up with one last final thought. People have asked me, like, why do I continue to rail on about Trump and Trumpism? And that's because Trump was a symptom of this previous thing, which we just generically call ethno-Christian white nationalist militantism or whatever. And he might not be, Trump himself might not be directly, as a phenomenon, as a character, as a person, might not be caused by that movement. He might not have been born out of that movement directly, but he understood how to seduce, ingratiate himself to, and garner the support of that movement without without getting stopped for doing it. And there's, of course, free speech in the world. And we've talked about free speech and the various misconceptions about how it does and does not work before, especially in very recent episodes. And I'm hoping to maybe finally get around doing a serious, focused episode that is entitled about it and kind of bring all those disparate thoughts together at some point. But it's a weird thing, and it obviously gets used to excuse a lot of inherently nefarious, malicious, toxic, corrosive ideology. And we'll have to agree that free speech does not mean you get to say whatever you want without consequences. I personally, as a podcast host and a content creator and a former aspiring to become professional theater artist, and only former because I really don't know what path I could take to become a professional theater performance artist at this time. Perhaps in the future I can return to that. It's expensive to break into theater, man. It just takes investment money that, anyways, it's a whole nother thing. Where was I? Spiraling all out of control again. These issues are weaponized against us, as I've spoken on before. And we are being called by a higher power to transcend them, to transcend the weaponization of difficult, thorny, challenging, triggering issues. And, arguably, to lean on the cannabis angle of this particular episode as we wrap up to the end of it, cannabis is here to facilitate a lot of that work. Now, and I have been jokingly accused of, or not accused, but people have joked with me that, jokingly asked, I guess, questioned if there's some sort of cannabis totalitarianism, that could problematically evolve out of some movement to promote cannabis culturally. And I think no, because, at the center of it is the spiritual understanding of what binds us together, not the cannabis use. At the center of everything I'm trying to discuss is the effort to facilitate others in realizing that their own inner journey is where our solutions will be found. Not someone else's inner journey, not my inner journey for you, right? Like, I'm not here to demand everyone believe in what I believe in. the way Trump seems to be demanding blind faith, personal loyalty, and belief in whatever he says is what's to be believed in. We all are being called by this higher power, the cosmos itself, to bring about healing to the world, not to fight and win a war, not to fight and win a political war, not to fight and win a literal war, not to fight and win an ideological war, not to fight and win an imagined sort of exaggerated fake spiritual war, because that is totally out there as a fake thing being used to manipulate people. Not to fight and win a race war or a culture war, but to stand up to every obstacle and naysayer and denier that is fighting against and blocking the collective healing of the species. I don't like absolutist answers, right? But if there is one thing that I've come across in my 30 plus years of questioning reality and questioning history and questioning what we've been taught and questioning politics and questioning religion and questioning my own experience in this meat suit, there's one thing I think might solve the problems we all collectively created that I don't pretend to know for absolutely 100% dead certain in a judgmental, everybody else is wrong and stupid for not knowing this already kind of way, because I don't. I could be wrong. But that, like, holy shit, you guys, why aren't we investigating it? If it's right, it's our birthright. If it's true, it's our birthright. And that's the kind of the thing I've labeled all, species-wide, all-inclusive, third eye opening, transformational, spiritual, metaphysical, energetic healing. To come back to that point again. And I forgive the broken record vibe. If you hear enough of my podcast, you've heard me say that a million times. But do you know why I say it a lot? Because it's not just an idea. I'm not proposing an ideology about worshiping and blindly adhering to dogma derived around the notion that someday we should achieve that. I'm suggesting that we can achieve that. The way the sunflower that was raised in a greenhouse with flat static lighting, when finally exposed to nature and returned to the sunlight, knows how to track the sun. Or would arguably, hopefully I'm not wrong and they all get fucked and they can't track the sun anymore and die. That would be horrible. Then my analogy would be ruined. But the way a sunflower knows how to track the sun, right? It doesn't need eyes, does it? To be able to open up its petals and turn like an autonomous solar panel to where the most direct sunlight is available, because that's the direction the sun is literally in. That's the level of self-denial and self-abuse and self-torment and limitation and self-undermining we have been collectively as a species for generations. And that sucks. It's depressing, but the silver lining is that means we can indeed transcend ourselves if it's true. So why aren't we investigating it instead of burning all these fires that we're burning?
And that is the latest madness from behind the orange wall. Thank you for listening to GMT, a special segment of the Almost Daily ZenCast. Hey.
I pushed the wrong one again. I was terrible. That was unprofessional. That's a sound effect.
Well, folks, that bowl is cashed and dusted. Thank you for joining me for yet another most excellent session of Cannabis Talk. Stay lit, pay it forward, and remember, the world needs healing, and cannabis heals. Until next time, I have been your spiritual cannabis mystic talk show host, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo.
Whether you smoke or not, farewell and namaste, and thank you for tuning in.
For coughing. As my old...
That's a longer clip, and I'm not going to play it all because it's a great story, but I just want to end this show now. Peace be with you. May it blossom in your heart. May you cultivate it in your soul and your mind and your intellect and your words and your actions.